A declaration of war on global food security. Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports could push tens of millions into severe hunger, says the UN.
It will have extraordinary consequences. We are already facing the worst food crisis since World War II.
Ukraine's first war crimes trial ends with a life sentence for a Russian soldier. That's as a Russian diplomat resigns, saying the war's made him ashamed of his country. More on Ukraine now, and we can turn to a court which has sentenced a Russian tank commander to life in prison for killing an unarmed civilian. Vadim Shishimarin was the first person to stand trial for war crimes since Russia's invasion 3 months ago. He had admitted shooting the 62-year-old civilian, but said he'd been acting on orders and he will appeal against his sentence.
A Russian diplomat quits over his country's invasion of Ukraine, calling it bloody and needless.
A Russian diplomat has quit over his country's invasion of Ukraine, calling it bloody, witless and absolutely needless. Boris Bondarev, a counselor at Russia's mission to the United Nations in Geneva, said he's never been more ashamed of Russia as when it sent its troops across the border. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg spoke to Mr. Bondarev on the phone in an exclusive interview.
He not only resigned, but he basically stormed out. He launched a scathing attack on the Kremlin. He issued a statement on social media saying, "I've never been so ashamed of my country." The aggressive war, he said, unleashed by Putin against Ukraine and against the entire Western world. He said it was not only a crime against the Ukrainian people, but also a crime against the people of Russia. Now, later I managed to get through to Mr. Bondarev on the telephone, and he told me more about why he decided to resign from the Russian Foreign Ministry.
I strongly disagree and disapprove of what my government is doing and has been doing at least since February, and I don't want to be associated with it any longer.
How difficult a decision was it?
You know, it was not a decision like to do or not to do. It was just to do and when. So I don't see any alternative.
Are you worried about your safety after taking such a decision?
Well, I think you may say so.
How shocked were you by what has happened after February the 24th, by this offensive in Ukraine?
Well, I was shocked as any normal person would have been, because you know that the first news I got on the morning of February 21st is that just Russian Air Force bombed Kiev and Kharkov, and the last time those cities were bombed, it was during the Second World War, and they were bombed by Germans, and now it was by us. Any Russian must be very shocked. I think so.
How widespread in the Russian Foreign Ministry do you think is this feeling of shock and opposition to what is happening in Ukraine?
Frankly speaking, I don't think that it is widespread. It is not.
And why is that?
I think most people, majority of them, are following the propaganda and what their superiors tell them. You know, it's when you work in the ministry, you work in a hierarchy, so you must obey what your superior tell you. And for many years, any critical approach has been erased from the ministry, mostly. So most people, they just take anything that they're told for granted without any criticism, without any consideration by themselves.
We must keep in mind that Boris Bondarev is not the most senior official, right, at the Russian mission in Geneva. He's not the ambassador or the deputy permanent representative or the first counselor. He's a counselor. But still, he's on the diplomatic staff there. So this is an embarrassment for the Kremlin. But I thought his last answer there was quite interesting, because he admits he is in the minority. He admits that most officials in the foreign ministry support the government line on the special military operation. So I don't think the Russian authorities will be too bothered by this resignation.
The United Nations World Food Programme has described Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports as a declaration of war on global food security that could push tens of millions of people into severe food shortages. It echoes concerns raised by the Ukrainian government and wider accusations that the Kremlin is deliberately targeting food supplies. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, reports.
Across the world, food and energy crises are hitting households, increasing social instability and hunger, and leading to whole countries going bust. Sri Lanka at first, but more are feared to be heading in the same direction, from Southeast Asia to the Middle East, and it's also affecting the UK too. With Russia's war in Ukraine making these supply shocks much worse, the economic stakes are very high here and across the world, according to one of Britain's top bankers.
Many of the conversations here in Davos have been, what percentage likelihood do you attach to a recession? I'll say 50-50.
Right now, those emerging markets racked up debts understandably during the pandemic, and many, perhaps dozens, are going to go bust. Is that how you see it?
Hopefully not dozens, but when you have a combination of political instability, an economic body blow, cost of living crisis, also importing energy, it's going to be very tough.
Part of the problem is that the natural response that should bring down energy or food prices, producing more, isn't working because, for example, Russia is blockading Ukraine's food exports.
Well, if we don't open those ports, you're talking about a declaration of war on global food security. It will have extraordinary consequences. We are already facing the worst food crisis since World War II. And when you take 400 million people that are fed by the food that comes out of Ukraine and you shut that off, and then you add on top of that fertilizer problems, droughts, food costs, fuel costs, we're looking at a hailstorm on Earth.
The world's biggest importers of wheat, the Egyptians, told us they can cope for now, though prices are surging.
The government is putting in place and utilizing tools to limit that price increase, especially on the most vulnerable. We do have a high degree of resilience in terms of our stocks of basic commodities, and we'll continue to explore and to cooperate with our partners in alternative sources.
This forum is normally about a combination of high finance and high politics. So far, it's been about the most basic of commodities, food, and the soaring prices affecting everywhere, including Britain. And the fear of many here is that this is not an accident. It's a conscious strategy, the weaponization of famine by the Kremlin. A standing ovation for President Zelensky's video address. His deputy prime minister says the West needs to get Ukraine's food exports past Russia's ships.
So we need the assistance of our partners, international partners, to secure our exports through the seaports. So I mean that from the defense point of view, to find a way to build a corridor or another solution, how to give the opportunity to Ukrainian vessels to export.
So some sort of safe passage.
Safe passage, yeah.
Events in Ukraine have already proven horrific, but mountains of its grain blocked from reaching the world's most hungry could yet make that worse. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Davos, Switzerland.
Well, I want to tell you now about Denis Karachev, who has played his cello in some of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. But as the invasion of Ukraine took hold, he played in the ruins of his hometown, Kharkiv. Well, since the start of the war, he has been volunteering in Kharkiv, but this weekend he was in Lithuania, and he sent this message to the young musicians graduating from Boston's New England Conservatory.
I want you to know that every one of us has the power to change this world. You have the voice to speak for human souls. You have the courage to bring something spiritual and beautiful into this world. Even at good time, even at difficult time, even at war, you have this power. The art is the ability to creation, and creation is a divine property. I'm really happy to congratulate you today from Ukraine. Let's stand together and work for peace and freedom at all the world.
Beautiful words. There will
Russian forces in eastern Ukraine are continuing attacks as they seek to seize the Donbass region.
Yeah, this comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky urged world leaders to end all trade with Russia.
Well, our correspondent Joe Inwood is in Kyiv for us. Morning, Joe. Good to see you. What's the latest on the ground over there?
So we understand that the attacks, the focus is still this city of Severodonetsk, and that Russians are continuing their attempts to encircle it as they have been for the last few days. We understand now that they're still trying to come down from the south, and that's where they are making progress. And the latest assessment we've got is that there's now about a 25-kilometre gap of Ukrainian territory preventing them from coming around and completing this complete encirclement of the city. But this force called the Joint Forces Operation is there. They are very well dug in, and we understand that they are holding the lines fairly kind of consistently, but still coming up against incredibly heavy Russian bombardment.